On the cold afternoon of November 28, 1985, a group of 7 cavers set out to explore the Colson Creek Cave in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. The area had recently experienced heavy rainfall, leading to severe flooding. The group had initially planned to explore a different cave, Friar's Hole, but after learning of flooding in the area, they wisely decided to abandon their original plan. They chose instead to explore Colson Creek Cave, which seemed to offer a safer adventure. This is the tragic story of the Colson Creek Cave. The decision to change caves was not made lightly. The group knew the risks of caving in flooded areas and had planned carefully to avoid such dangers. They believed Colson Creek Cave, though unfamiliar to them, would be less likely to flood and would provide an interesting and safe exploration. Little did they know, the cave would soon become the scene of a tragedy that none of them could have predicted. As they entered the cave, they were greeted by a narrow canyon about 5 to 8 feet wide. The floor was covered by a shallow stream that flowed swiftly over loose rock slabs. The sound of rushing water echoed through the cave, but the air felt still and cool. The group pressed forward, cautiously but with a sense of excitement. They had been in caves before and were familiar with the hazards, but today they would face a danger they could have never anticipated. About 50 feet into the cave, the group came upon a massive boulder. This rock, which stood about 5 feet tall, partially blocked the passage. The group now faced a choice. They could either try to climb over the boulder or squeeze through a narrow gap between the rock and the cave wall where the stream rushed by. This gap was tight, but it looked manageable. 3 of the cavers decided to go first, choosing the narrow gap between the rock and the wall. They carefully squeezed through the tight space, moving slowly to avoid slipping or bumping into the sharp edges of the rock. They made it through without any incident, and the rest of the group followed. The narrow passage was cramped, but it was still possible to move through it with enough care. Eric Takei, a 26-year-old man with plenty of caving experience, led the next group of 3. Eric had been caving for years and was considered the most experienced member of the group. He chose to follow the left-hand route, stepping carefully as he made his way through the stream. The water was cold and swift, but it didn't seem dangerous. He focused on his footing as he moved toward the boulder. As Eric reached the center of the boulder, everything changed in an instant. The massive rock, which had seemed stable moments before, shifted suddenly. It was as if time slowed down. Eric could feel the ground beneath him tremble, and before he could react, the boulder began to tilt. The weight of the rock shifted dramatically, and it became unstable. The cavers who were close by reacted immediately, shouting out to warn Eric, but it was too late. The boulder crashed into the narrow corridor, pinning Eric between the cave wall and the rock. The sound of the rock crashing was deafening. The force of the impact left Eric completely immobile. His body caught between the unyielding stone and the hard cave wall. His left temple and shoulder were pressed against the cold stone of the wall, while his right cheekbone was trapped against the rock. His legs dangled beneath him, completely useless, as the weight of the boulder pressed down on him. The other cavers were stunned. They rushed forward, trying to assess the situation. They saw that Eric was trapped and could do nothing but stare in shock as the reality of the situation sank in. His body was frozen in place. The group tried to push the boulder off of Eric, but it was far too heavy. They grunted and strained with all their might, but the rock wouldn't budge. Eric's breaths grew shallower as the weight on his chest made it harder for him to take in air. But despite his efforts to move or cry out, Eric was stuck. The others could only watch in helpless despair as Eric's condition worsened. One of the cavers, realizing that there was little they could do, rushed out of the cave to get help. The remaining cavers stayed behind, desperately trying to free their friend from the rock that had trapped him. As they pushed and pulled on the boulder, time seemed to stretch on forever. The group tried everything they could think of to shift the rock, using crowbars and other tools to leverage the massive stone. They worked together, grunting and straining with all their strength, but it was in vain. The boulder was simply too heavy to move. Meanwhile, Eric's breathing grew even more shallow. His body was beginning to shut down, and his friends could see the life slowly draining from him. His shallow breaths faded, and then there was silence. A small trickle of blood ran from his left nostril, and his pulse, though still faint, was fading fast. More rescuers began to arrive, and by 4:20 p.m., they had brought a hydraulic jack to the scene. Almost an hour had passed since the accident, and time was running out. His friends dragged him to a dry part of the cave, about 20 feet away, and immediately began performing CPR. But despite their best efforts, Eric didn't respond. His skin had turned pale, and although his body was still warm, life had already begun to slip away. Paramedics arrived and took over the CPR efforts. They worked tirelessly for more than an hour, fighting to revive him. By 5:25 p.m., Eric was finally carried out of the cave on a stretcher. The cold air hit them like a wave, but they barely noticed as they rushed him to the hospital. At the hospital, doctors immediately administered IV fluids and cardiac drugs in a last-ditch attempt to save Eric, but it was too late. His heart had stopped, and there was nothing more they could do. Eric Takei was pronounced dead. His life had been taken in an instant by an unpredictable accident, one that none of his friends could have foreseen, despite all of their experience and caution. The cave that had seemed like a safer choice had turned into his tomb. The tragedy of Eric's death left his friends devastated. They had tried everything to save him, but the forces of nature were simply too strong. Eric's death serves as a tragic reminder of how unpredictable and dangerous the natural world can be, even when everything seems to be going according to plan. His friends would never forget the day that a seemingly safe cave exploration turned into the most heartbreaking experience of their lives. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more gripping tales from the underwater world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do in a situation like this? Until next time, stay safe, explore wisely, and always respect the depths.